Hey guys, Michelle here. Today I'm talking about the narcissist and the codependent, and I want to talk about 3 things that they have in common. Normally when I'm talking about them, I usually talk about them as if they're from 2 completely different planets, but the truth is they have a lot more in common than we tend to want to admit to. Okay, so I want to talk about what they have in common, and then I also want to talk about what we can do to overcome these challenges that we have. The first thing that codependents and narcissists have in common is the fact that they have the same wound. Okay, they were both children, innocent children that were born to toxic parents that taught them that their authentic self needed to be denied, that any assertiveness, any individuality that they displayed needed to be shamed and punished. They were taught conditional love. They were taught that they were only good if they were doing, being, thinking, and feeling exactly what the toxic parent wanted them to do, be, think, or feel. So they have that same wound. The interesting thing is that they handled that wound differently. So the one that became the codependent was willing to forfeit all sense of self in an effort to earn that parent's approval. They divorced parts of themselves. Anytime a part of themselves was rejected by the toxic parent, the codependent shoved that piece of themselves into the shadow, so to speak, right? They didn't want to look at it. They didn't want to accept it as their own. So they became very fragmented because they were rejected. Those parts of themselves were rejected. So they go about life trying to be whatever somebody else wants because they never developed a self. So without having a self, what they do is when they wind up in a relationship, they will be whatever the person wants them to be, whatever makes that person happy. They will try to make sure that they live to make that other person happy without any sense of self inside. Okay, it's all about the other person and making that person happy. The child that took the narcissistic route doesn't have a self either. To handle the pain of not having that self, that sense of self, they created a false self, a false sense of who they are. So it's almost a bit delusional, right? Because what they would do is anything that wasn't a part of that false self, anything they didn't like inside of themselves or that somebody else didn't like, they projected it outward to someone else. And so they live life polishing their false self, even though their false self and their real self are usually not in harmony with each other. But it's almost like they don't realize that. So they live their life in this delusion that this false self is who they are. And no one can convince somebody very high on the scale of NPD that that's not really who they are. The sad thing is that people like that, people that took that narcissist route and they have this false image, they are usually loved and adored and looked up to by everyone but those they live with. Because their false self is like a coat that they put on in winter. They're going outside, they put their coat on, they bring their false self with them. They portray that false self to other people. When they get home, they hang up that false self like you hang up your winter coat, and they show who they really are to their family members. Okay, bye guys. Nice having you over. We had so much fun. I can't wait to see you again. So, from the wound of being rejected as an individual, an authentic being, one creates a false self and the other morphs into whatever they need to do or be in order to make someone else happy. So people are used as emotional regulators for narcissists. In order for them to not feel stressed and angry, they need to provoke those feelings in their family members let's say they're going to an event, right? And they're stressed out and they're insecure. Yes, they are insecure, even though they pretend to be the all-powerful ones. But because that insecurity, because that stress, those fears are not in alignment with their perfect false self, they provoke arguments, they provoke stressful situations so that they can use their family members as an emotional regulator to calm down. Then they get to the gathering or wherever they're going, and they feel wonderful, they feel great, they're confident, they're smiling, and their family looks like they've just been run over by a truck. And people start to think, well, what's wrong with that family? They look so miserable. This poor guy or girl, look at how happy he or she is. Poor thing has to put up with these miserable people. And they have no idea that the narcissist is using their family members as emotional regulators. So I know a lot of you guys are aware of that, and now you're probably thinking, well, how does a codependent do that, Michelle? That's impossible. Well, codependents, because they've never been taught self-love, they've never been taught unconditional love, they've never been taught how to accept themselves, right? They were only allowed to like themselves if their parent liked that part of them. And if their parent, their toxic parent, could take credit for that, then they were allowed to like that aspect of their personality. But their personality, for the most part, was rejected because their worth and their value was always dependent on how their toxic parents saw them. They use people as emotional regulators too, just with a different means to an end. So somebody that's codependent in a relationship will feel good and feel like a good person and feel lovable when their significant other is giving them validation, is confirming their value and telling them that they are lovable, right? But if for some reason they're not getting that external validation the way they need, it affects their mood. Now they don't feel lovable, they don't feel good enough, and so they will try harder to do and give and be for this other person. And it might seem like, wow, that's love. But in a way, what they're really doing is trying to regulate so that they can feel better by, and I know this sounds, I know it's going to be a little bit of controversy with this, but just think about that. In my face-to-face coaching, I've had so many people tell me, Michelle, I really thought I was a generous person. I really thought I was a good person, but I realized that I was doing those generous things because I needed to feel valuable. I needed their confirmation. I needed their validation. They were getting that emotional regulation from that other person. The good news between codependents and narcissists is that the narcissist needs the other person to feel miserable in order to feel good. But the codependent just needs the person to feel good, to love them in order to feel good. So one is toxically destructive, and another is, yes, it is manipulating, because it is a form of manipulation, but it's not meant to harm the person. So even though I'm seeing it as a similarity, obviously the motives behind the actions are completely different. And the last thing that narcissists and codependents have in common is a severe lack of emotional boundaries. A narcissist will have no ability to understand that their significant other may have a completely different emotional perspective than them. It might be in something like the weather. You guys have heard me use this example a lot, where somebody could be in the car and they're like, oh, are you cold? I could put the heat on. And the partner's not cold, so they're like, no, I'm good. But because the narcissist is cold, they will continue to ask the question until you are in alignment with their perception, because they can't handle the thought, or they don't look at someone else as being separate. There's no boundary between, okay, they feel and their feelings and their self ends here and yours begins. No, everything is morphed together. Codependents also have no emotional boundaries as well, and that's why it's really hard for them to sometimes know how they feel. because they don't know where this person ends, and they begin, especially if they're high on the empath scale, they can pick up other people's feelings and think that they're theirs. Hey, I'm so glad I caught you home. How you doing? Me? Me? I don't know. Life actually really sucks right now. It's almost like somebody sneezes and you catch a cold. Well, codependents can do that. Somebody has an emotion and they catch it because they don't recognize the emotional boundaries that they have, or that they should have, I should say. So why is it that some kids pick one route and become more narcissistic, and some kids go the codependent route? It's a good question, and from what I understand, some of it has to do with our genes. If a child has a strong empathy gene, then it's going to be really hard to take the narcissist route. Their genetics, their genes, their inner makeup wouldn't allow it, because they have so much feeling, they have so much empathy. Okay, so that's one reason. Another reason is that sometimes some kids that do have empathy that wind up taking the route of the narcissist is because it's a coping skill. It's a childhood coping skill that when you are being abused, if you can't beat them, join them. Their thought is, if I could just be like mom or dad, whoever's the abuser in the family, if I could just be more like mom or dad, maybe they'll love me. If I could just act more like mom or dad, maybe I won't feel this intense toxic shame that is overwhelming me. So it's a coping skill that some children develop. Now, the good thing is that those that wind up taking the route of narcissist, if they do not become malignant narcissists, if rather they have what we call in the community of narcissistic abuse, we call it narcissistic fleas. If they just have narcissistic fleas, but they can self-reflect, they can look at themselves, they're willing to admit their mistakes, they're willing to see what they need to work on, then you can get healthy, just like the codependent that is willing to do the inner work wants to get healthy as well. The narcissist can do that as well if they're not malignant and if they're not so high on the scale that they're not willing to self-reflect. Those are the minority. However, I have done a lot of sessions, coaching sessions with individuals that were raised as the golden child, that were trained to be the mini-me of the narcissist, and so they had enough empathy still to realize in their adult life, this is toxic. They may not have realized it with their parent, but now they're in the dynamics of their own family, and they start looking at themselves and they want to change. The good news is that they can heal and get rid of those narcissistic fleas, just like a codependent can get rid of being dependent on someone else for their own love and value. So we're entering a new year soon, and I want my videos to really be about the healing process and how to heal these wounds that happened in childhood, so that we can go on, we can move past them to live lives that we're happy in our own skin and enjoying. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell icon so that you're notified of my latest videos.